Hello everyone, welcome back to the workshop. Today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about measuring tools and how I use different types of measuring tools to measure accurately in the workshop. I have 5 pieces of primary equipment in the workshop. I have the table saw, I have the band saw, I have my miter saw, I have my router table, I have the thicknesser planer. 2 of those tools have a measuring gauge built into them. The table saw has one for the fence and the band saw has one for the fence. Now, these tools I consider to be rough guides. I never ever get perfect cuts to the fraction of a millimetre off of either of these machines unless I set it up in a different way. If I just use the gauge on the machine, then I always allow a certain amount of flexibility, plus or minus 1 millimetre sometimes. Now, another tool that gets used just for rough measurements is the standard roller tape. I don't like these things. These things are not as accurate as I would like them to be, certainly when it comes to any kind of cabinet making. So knowing that I've got these inaccuracies, certainly in these 2 machines, the table saw and the band saw, and in the tape measure, and the fact that I have no measurement or no guide measure at all on the miter saw because I don't see the need for one, I rely much more on some precision measuring tools that I have acquired over the course of time and I now use exclusively in the workshop. The first of these is quite simple, it's a steel ruler. Now, steel rulers are way more accurate than these roller tapes. They're good for home DIY if you need to know roughly how big a space is or what the distance is. But if you're trying to make a component for a piece of cabinetry and you want it to be exactly the dimensions that you've specified, then steel rulers are a very, very good way of getting very, very close. Now, one tip that I will show you, one thing I will say about the steel ruler is a lot of people make the same mistake when they're measuring up with a ruler. I don't do it this way, but I've seen people regularly use the end, get the end flush, and then mark the cut that they want to make using a pencil at the point that they want to do here. That isn't how I would do it. If I was going to do it, I would put the ruler and bring the mark to the edge, which I can see very accurately, and then I would be able to make a much more accurate line by drawing along the end of the ruler. And that's one of the advantages that I see in a steel ruler, is that can produce a much more accurate cut, or dimensioned cut I should say, than if you were to use a guide that's on the machine that may not be accurate. It may not be dependable in terms of its accuracy, and it may have moved, adjusted itself, whatever, and you end up with a cut that's not right. Another tool that I use all the time is my square. Now, this square was quite an expensive square. This was £120, but it is the squarest thing that I have in the workshop, other than me possibly. It's accurate, it's graduated to 0.5 millimetre. It means that I can check the square, obviously, because it is 100% square, and I have checked. But it means that if I want to do any kind of layout line, then I can just select the distance in from the edge that I want to put the layout line. I can offer it up to the piece of wood, and I could use this as an example. I could offer it up to the piece of wood, and I can simply work my way along, put in some guide marks, and if I put 2 or 3 in, then I would be able to use a steel ruler to join those up, and I would know that line is pretty much where I would want it to be. And that's something else as well about precision tools. Marking. If you can't mark accurately, then what's the point of being able to measure accurately? If you can measure it and then not mark it accurately, I always use a very sharp HB pencil, and I have a pot of them that I keep to one side that are sharpened, and I have rules for my pencils, which is if it's sharpened, it's point up, I take it out, I use it, and then I put it back in the cup, point down, and when they're all or the majority of the pencils are point down, I'll go away and sit down for 10 minutes with a cup of tea and an electric sharpener and sharpen all the pencils. I do actually have some marking knives as well. So this tool cost me about 120 quid. I don't know what that is in US dollars. I don't know what you guys would have to pay for something like this in the States or in Canada, because prices tend to be roughly 1 to 1. Although there's a difference in the exchange rate, it does seem to be that in US dollars things seem to be cheaper. But you'll pay 120 quid for that. Absolutely worth its weight in gold. Buy one. If you can get one second hand, brilliant. But if you can't, buy this one new. Another tool that I use all the time are these cheap aluminium carpenter's squares. Now I have 4 of the smaller ones and 1 larger one. These are 2 a penny. You know, you can buy them on Amazon for less than a tenner. You can buy them on eBay cheaper if you buy them second hand. If you can find these in car boot sales or whatever, always buy them, because they are super accurate and they're cast in one piece. So you know this is going to be, again, something that is accurate. And I have used this to test this, and I am happy that the pair of them are, well, I know that's square, so I'm happy that these are square. So another piece of equipment that I have is my vernier caliper gauge. Now, again, about 120 quid. Don't know what it is in US. This one is made by by the internationally renowned measurement company Mitutoyo. I hope I've pronounced that right. Super accurate. Absolutely love this. Use this so much in every application that I can think of in the workshop. If I want to measure something accurately, in fact, what I do is I often cut something and then measure it with this to check that the cut was accurate. But certainly, as a measuring tool, this is super accurate and well worth the money. If you can get one of these on eBay, second hand, buy it. Okay, if you see one second hand, jump on it. This one is an analog dial. I bought myself an analog dial one because I like the spinny roundy thing. I don't know what it is about being able to see the dial and dialing it in and watching it do its job. It's just fantastic. You can get a digital one which will give you a straight digital readout, but this I find much more pleasing to use, and that's another aspect of any tool that you have in a workshop, is that if the tool's a pleasure to use, you're going to use it. Now this, hopefully you'll be able to see that. Now this is graduated in 0.02 of a millimeter increments. So you can see it numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are 0.1 of a millimeter each, and there's 5 graduations between those. And you could probably put the needle between those graduations, so you could probably get it down to 0.01 of a millimeter in terms of accuracy. Now we don't need that level of accuracy in woodwork, but it's still nice to have it. Now this tool has 3 functions. So I use my scrap piece of wood. You can measure outside dimensions, like so, using the large jaws, and I know that to be 80 millimeters, and it's about 0.2 of a millimeter off, which is close enough in terms of cabinetry. You can use the smaller jaws at the back to measure the internal dimensions, and that is almost exactly 12 millimeters, 12.2 millimeters, and that's the dimension, that is the thickness of the router bit that I used to measure this. And a really key function, a really helpful function of this caliper is there's an extendable slider out the bottom, which means you can measure the depth. And again, that depth comes in at 12.2, 12.2? 11.2. Okay, I thought that was 12.2, but never mind. Now it's telling me it's 12. When I do it properly, it comes out as 12. Right, so that comes out as 12 millimeters deep, which is the depth I know that I set on the router table. Absolutely fantastic piece of kit. Can't recommend it highly enough. I'm going to take a moment while I have this piece of wood as well, just to talk about the measuring setups on my planer thicknesser and on my router table. Had to think then on the router table. On the router table, I have an electronic lift for the router with a built-in motor, which means that I can lift the tip of the router blade up, just drop a scrap piece of wood over the top, use the tool to lift the router bit up until I feel the piece of wood start to lift up, and then I can step down in 0.1 increments and keep checking to see if it's rocking and wait for it to stop rocking. And then when it's not rocking, when I go up 1.1 and it is rocking and go down 0.1 and it's not rocking, that means I'm absolutely flush with the surface. I can zero the control box, and then I can lift the router head to exactly the depth that I want in 0.1 of a millimeter increments. That allows me to make very, very accurate notches, as I'm using here, finger joints basically for making boxes. I can use it to produce accurate dados, accurate rabbits. All sorts of tasks become so much easier because I have accurate measuring on the router table. Now, I have something similar on the thickness of planer. The advantage is I can thickness wood down to any dimension thickness it from 6mm up to about 230 millimeters, accurate to 0.1 of a millimeter. So one of the things that I do for this particular component of a cabinet that I'm making, a set of apothecary drawers, which hopefully the video will be out shortly, what it allows me to do is to rough cut this on the table saw so that it is maybe 53 millimeters wide, and it's probably at that point, because this is 50 by 12 mil. Now at that point it was probably 18 mil thick because it's old flooring and there's a lot of crap to get rid of, and I would cut it to 53, 55 millimeters, and then I would put it through the planer, and the planer will take the crap off the top and the back, so the grooves off the back and the dirty flooring off the front, and I can plane this down accurately so that it is exactly 12 millimeters thick. But the other thing is that I can plane it in this dimension and make sure that this piece is absolutely 50 millimeters thick. Not 50.1 millimeters, not 49.9 millimeters, but exactly 50 millimeters thick. And using that means that I can then build from accurate plans that I've designed on SketchUp. Now, I use SketchUp as my design tool. You've seen it in a couple of videos already. You've seen me using it briefly when I made the engineer's cabinet. If you have a tool like SketchUp and you master it and you make your plans, having accurate machinery that can make sure that it can dimension your material exactly as you want it, that is going to make your assembly, your construction and your assembly of your cabinets so much easier. Before I get on to my main go-to measuring tool, I'm just going to talk briefly about this little item. This item is if I turn it on, this item is an inclinometer. It's a digital inclinometer. So if I put it down, it will give you a reading and it will tell you what angle it thinks it is at this moment in time. Now, I use this primarily for the table saw and for the miter saw when I'm setting an angle on the blade to give me, say, a miter cut. So if I was making a picture frame and I wanted a 45-degree cut in the material, I probably wouldn't actually be using the table saw blade at an angle for that, but you understand what I'm talking about. If you need to cut, use the table saw blade at an angle, or you need to use your miter saw blade at an angle, this would be the tool that I would use to set it up accurately. Both of those tools have analog readouts. They have settings. You can use those and they will be close enough-ish. If you're trying to do something like a picture frame, you don't want to have something that's 45.5 degrees because it means all the cuts are going to be out and there's going to be gaps in places that you're going to have to fill. Now, one of the things I did when I set the table saw up is I made sure that when I set the table saw up, I got it absolutely flat using this gauge before I built the table around it, so that when I come to set the blade to 45 degrees, I know the blade is going to be at 45 degrees to the tabletop, because the tabletop is flat. And it's exactly the same with what I've done with the setup on the miter saw. Make sure that the miter saw is flat, and then every other angle you measure using your inclinometer is going to be good. And I always use this. I don't use the dial on the side of either machine. Okay, if I want to set an angle, then it's my inclinometer that I'm going to use. And so on to the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, this is a set of engineers' gauge blocks, and these again are made by the Japanese instrument and measurement makers Mitutoyo, and these are absolutely fantastic. This is what I use if I want to have an accurate cut on the table saw, the bandsaw, or on the miter saw. It's a standard set of engineers' gauge blocks. This is a Type 2 set. I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about the differences between Type 1 and Type 2 engineers' gauge block sets. A Type 1 set is very expensive. They're in the £8,000 to £10,000 to £12,000 mark for a normal set, because they're the blocks that are used to manufacture the Type 2. So these things have to be super accurate, because they're used to make super accurate tools. And they're used not just for making Type 2 gauge blocks, but for pretty much any measuring instrument. It would be when this was being made, or when this has been made, and when it goes into quality control and is checked, it would be a set of Type 1 gauge blocks that they would measure this against, that they would check this against to make sure that the measurements were absolutely 100% accurate. Type 2 sets are the next level down from that. Still super accurate, but the kind of tool set that you would expect to find around the machine shop or any workshop that was using metal. I use these in the workshop all the time. You've seen me in the videos use them to set up the table saw. If I'm using the table saw sled, or if I'm just using the fence on the table saw, you see me using them to set up a stop block on the miter box. You see me even using them to act as spacers between the runners on the cabinet sides for the engineer's tools chest, for the drawers to run in, to make sure that everything was absolutely 100% square and equidistant. Now, this particular set, if you bought it brand new, you'd probably be looking at £1,300 to £1,500. But I picked this set up on eBay for 200 quid. Now, I'm missing a couple of wear blocks at the top, don't use them. And I've got a whole load of graduated gauge blocks here that are graduated in steps of 0.5 of, they're all a millimetre thick, but they're all incrementally set up at 0.05 of a millimetre or more. I never need to measure that accurate when it comes to any kind of cabinet work. What I tend to use is the blocks from 1 millimetre up to 100 millimetres. And that was what I was looking for. So I've got a couple of pieces missing, but it doesn't make any difference. Those couple of pieces saved me £1,300 because I bought the set for 200 and it might have cost me 1,500 new. These appear on eBay all the time. I looked recently and there were 2 or 3 sets that were certainly under £300, and there were a couple of sets that were £350. If you can get yourself a set, I would highly recommend that you get some. Okay, they don't wear out, they go on forever. If you bought one set, that would be your set for the rest of your life, okay, or certainly the rest of your life that you spend in a workshop. These things I think are probably going to be buried with me. They're that important to me. Of all the measuring tools that I've shown you and talked about with you, these gauge blocks are my first go-to in almost every instance, and I love them. They make everything so much easier. And there you have it. I hope this has been interesting. I hope this has shed a little bit of light on how I use the tools and my expectations of the measuring tooling inside the workshop. If you have good quality tools and if you have good quality measuring tools, then your woodworking will go up a level almost instantly. In fact, it may even go up 2 levels. You get a set of gauge blocks and you'll suddenly find that doing the really complicated stuff that you were struggling with before suddenly becomes so much easier. Accurate measuring tools and investing in your measuring tools is probably the most important thing that you can do if you're starting out and you're building up your own collection of tools. I have tons of tools because I've been doing this for some time now and spending far too much of my money on tools in the workshop. And I know that not everybody can afford it, but if you can, stretch to these. If you can go and find yourself a set, and if you can't find them on eBay, look in junk shops, look in antique shops. They appear all over the place. I keep seeing them everywhere. So buy a set. That's all I'm saying, is that you never know, you might actually end up with a metalworking lathe, whereupon they will suddenly absolutely come into their own. But for lots and lots of other practical applications in the workshop, gauge blocks are an absolute must-have. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. There's going to be some more tooltip videos coming out in the next few weeks, so try and keep an eye open midweek for those coming out. If you enjoy the channel, if you enjoy everything I do, please subscribe. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Cheers.